So let me start by reminding everybody why we're here. This is the first virtual experience, as Jack said, and it's about building culture remotely. It's an industry roundtable, and that's the purpose. That's why we're all here. And I am not a professional, so I'm going to try to keep things moving and try to facilitate this discussion. But we do have experts with us. And first of all, I'd like to kind of go through those folks. Brad Sayre, he's the Senior Sourcing Manager, Cushman and Wakefield. And then we have Rick Jutras, Principal and Designer, Whitney Architects. And I think Laura is also joining from Whitney Architects as well. Yes. So that's fantastic to have these folks on board. And then we have Lauren Gant, Senior Ergonomics and Wellness Strategist for the HNI Corporation. So really excited to have a good group here. And to get right into it today, I think what I would do is really kind of start the conversation with this. COVID as a pandemic was unparalleled in its level of disruption across businesses in the United States and on a global basis. But what I found really interesting is that for me, I didn't sense that it was a level of disruption that was unexpected. Many of the trends that we saw prior to COVID were just accelerated during the course of COVID and accelerated at incredible rates. Let me give you a couple examples to maybe start the conversation. And the first that I found was that, you know, it wasn't just the working from home that was different, it's the way we had to digitally engage. So what did we do? Rather than digitally engaging at a measurable pace that everybody found comfortable, we overloaded everybody. Everything became digital overnight. Everything became about trying to locate those few digital cameras that were out there that you could hook up to your computer, or learning to work from your laptop because you didn't have that digital camera and you had to go back to a smaller screen. So those were some of the most obvious changes that occurred. But also what we started to see is that the workplace itself changed. And I'm not going to comment on that other than to tell you what happened maybe at the Hahn Company at some point. But also what changed tremendously is what we had to do to find comfort in our home work environment when we spent that 6 months or a year or even still so working from home. So where I would start today is first of all saying that at the Hahn Company, one of the things that we immediately did is we released our employees to go work from home. And we found that one of the things that changed our culture tremendously is we were usually working an 8 to 10 hour day. That was just kind of the known corporate standard. And it was probably the same for many other companies out there. But what we found is that many of our members at our company could not escape. That workday didn't become shorter because they were working from home. It became longer. They couldn't escape the digital engagement that was going on nonstop. So maybe just to start with, I would throw it to Rick first and maybe move around the panel and have you kind of give a quick overview of what were the changes to you personally in your workday and how you had to engage differently. Then we'll get into kind of the sauce of culture and workplace and some of the changes that had to go on beyond that. So Rick, maybe you could take it first and talk about how it affected you personally.
Sure. From a business standpoint, I think we were incredibly lucky in the idea that we had recently moved from Oak Brook to downtown and had just recently done a workplace assessment of our own business and how we wanted to work. The findings of that actually showed that we wanted to be more remote. We wanted to have free address, and we wanted to move everybody to more of a virtual platform. So fortunately, the day we kind of sent everybody home and asked everybody to work remotely, including myself, we were prepared. We had a robust back end, virtualized everything. Everybody was already on a laptop, and we already had a workplace strategy in place with protocols that allowed us to work remote. It was more about getting the work product done. That being said, we are still a very collaborative, creative business and entity. So creating and designing together, that is really where the challenge came in. So although we were set to work remotely from a transactionary standpoint, moving files around and reviewing and distributing material, from a creation standpoint, we weren't quite there. And that was a big learning curve for us. was how do you create these moments of engagement? How do you create the empathy of the work product and not just create transactionary engagements, just marking up drawings and sending them back to one another, but how do you get teams together and work collectively and collaboratively? And what we found was it was really difficult, and we tried to do as much engagement as we could on a per project basis. So that meant sending multiple sets of samples to team members, design members, opening up the video and doing design charrette sessions on the living room floor, family room floor with the video running. It meant trying to meet in open environments or more public environments in which we could come together. But you know, as the situation evolved and changed, we changed with it. So we are, you know, returning back to the office, thankfully, to sort of readdress the deficiencies we had.
And what was the most challenging part, Rick? When you think back through that period of resetting culture and getting people to be engaged digitally over a screen and via microphone, what was the most challenging part? And what tools did you find work most effectively for you personally?
So it was the additional steps that were needed, right, to communicate an idea or to edit or create a work product. It was the ongoing markups, cut, paste, send, repeat, 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 repeat. Personally, for me, the greatest challenge, and I think this is maybe very personal to me, is that, you know, I'm not the best written communicator. I do not do well from a grammar standpoint, writing emails, writing text messages. It's not my strong suit. I'm a visual communicator. I'm a verbal communicator. I do better in person. And so it was challenging for me, especially leading a team, to do all this communication via text, writing, and not being able to engage with someone and react with someone. So that was a huge difficulty for me, and my team members and the firm that at large really had to adapt to sort of tailor how we engage with one another to fit those needs.
Laura, you were on the receiving end of some of that. What was the most challenging part for you personally in your role? But then on the receiving end of Rick's new model, where he was trying to pull people out to collaborate on the phone, how did that feel? And was there anything in particular that stood out to you as being successful?
Well, so I'm a bit newer to this team here, so I can kind of, but I experienced the same sort of thing at the firm I was with previously. And I think Rick kind of nailed it when he said, you know, there's extra steps that had to be taken. So I think there were kind of creating those spaces to have visual connection via camera and having those conversations. And then you had to back it up and make sure, you know, okay, I heard during our conversation, we had this, this, and this, and now we know that this is what's going on and what the tasks were to do. I think a lot of screenshots were taken too, because I don't know about you, Rick, but we did a lot of virtual like doodling on documents or on presentations. And then, you know, someone might want to wipe those doodles away to move on to the next thing. And you'd say, well, wait, I need to take a screenshot of that right away, because you didn't have a document that you were sharing in person that you could, you know, make copies of. But I think, you know, people coped, and moving forward, now we have some really good technology tricks I think will stay with us, but I think there will be some things that we want to cut out and just kind of move forward in the actual physical world.
I'll tell you, my first session with a product called Miro Whiteboard was disconcerting. It was like trying to look at a dish of spaghetti with 8 different cooks in the kitchen. So I'm with you. Brad, what about for you and your personal, you know, kickoff of COVID? How did you interact, and what new things changed the culture of your company as you began to go through the pandemic journey?
Yeah, similar to what Rick said, you know, our company is luckily in a very good position to tackle this. We already, you know, implemented hoteling practices at most of our offices, and most of us were working or used to work remote at least a couple days a week as it was. So we are in a unique position to be, you know, come into this very strong. That being said, we obviously utilize a lot of new technologies to cope with some of those factors that everyone else has been referring to as well. Honestly, for us, Teams and other collaborative work systems such as that, where you can have multiple parties in a live document working off that, sharing off that information, updating as needed, has been vital. Smartsheet is another one I know that we use quite a bit. So I think we always had access to a lot of those technologies, but the utilization rate has tremendously improved based as a result of this, the pandemic.
Fantastic. And Lauren, I see you're still, it looks like you're working from your home office. How did COVID affect you personally? And what was the change in the culture that you saw happen as a ergonomic specialist? What things did you notice right away about the shift, and how was it affecting the way people work?
Yeah, great questions. I don't know about you guys, but I remember taking out a piece of paper and writing down a ton of activities to keep my kids occupied for 2 weeks, right? This was going to be 2 weeks. They were going to be home, and then everybody was going to go back to school, and we were going to go about business as usual. And we're almost at 2 years now. So that, that list was thrown away after day 2. So I think that, we have learned how to really look at what is happening in our life, what is happening in our work, and how do those things, I don't even want to say balance, but how do those things cohabitate the same space? And what does that mean for how we show up mentally and physically at work and for our families? This idea that we can suck it up for 2 weeks applies to that mental state, and it also applies to our physical state. So we all sat at our dining room tables for the first couple months, right? And then I started getting lots of phone calls like, this ergo thing, this is real. Like, I didn't realize how important my office chair was until I didn't have it anymore. So thinking about what can we sustain for a short period of time versus what do we need to sustain us, permanently or semi-permanently is a different story. And I think to your point, Rick, this is unearthing a lot of issues that were sort of always in existence, but sort of able to sort of be band-aid over or covered up. So the fact that health and wellness is now, a central piece of what we're thinking about when we're designing spaces is great. Like, it's a good thing for us to take from this and move forward. And it does make me a little bit more busy, but I love it, and I hope we continue to think this way moving forward.
Well, thank you. I'm going to tell a quick story and stay on culture for a minute. Then I want to move to some of these side subjects that are super interesting. But does anybody remember early in the pandemic, there was some kind of political event going on, and CNN did an interview, and it was with this guy that was obviously in his home office. It was new to him. All of a sudden the door opens and his son or daughter comes running into the office, and then his wife or somebody that was helping him take care of the kids, she comes sprinting in, and they're trying to stay below the line of the camera and take care of getting this young child out of the camera range while he could do his interview on international news. Do you remember that? So the story I have is a little bit similar to that, and it's this. Early on in the pandemic, the culture of our company is that we separated work from personal. There were it was a very clear demarcation point. And when you were on a Teams call or on a Zoom call, you're expected to be fully engaged and visually present, so the distractions had to be kept to a minimum. But did you notice what's occurred in our company in particular, but maybe in your companies too? We're now 2 years into this thing, or getting close to 2 years into it. And what's really interesting to me is that we went from this environment where there was no distractions allowed during a team call and business was business, to now this morning on our Teams call, one of our folks, actually his young son was out of daycare because he had pink eye, and his young son was sitting on his lap during the middle of this call. And that's not the first time that's happened. It's happened frequently. Our cultures had to reset to be more accommodating, because at the end of the day, we now have people that are living through the effects of a pandemic that include things like childcare now. It's tenuous. Sometimes it doesn't happen because there's a variant outbreak and they have to shut down childcare. So the reset of our culture and how meetings are conducted and how flexible we have to be has changed dramatically as well. maybe going back to Rick and Laura at your company, have you encountered situations like that? And has that become the new norm, and is it acceptable? Or is that the new norm and people are still trying to push the kids out to the side and stay focused, no eye contact, changes or any of that? How's that work for you?
I think that what I've experienced is that it does become a little more acceptable, or there's a better understanding, I think, across the board. I guess one way to say it is it sort of leveled everybody a bit. We all understand that we're all human. So I think from, as an employee, I feel like as long as I'm honest and I can say, okay, I've got these challenges happening right now. I'm going to get my job done. However, I may have to be on at 5 a.m., take a couple emails, do some things, then I might have to take care of some children, and then I might have to jump back and then be on late again at night. But I think even in our interactions outside of the firm, you've seen some of this. I can remember doing a presentation to a CEO, and he was in his dining room table, and his cat jumped onto his laptop while we were having the presentation. And again, it helped sort of equalize everyone. So even though he was my client and somebody that I was looking up to and trying to do my best for, I thought, oh, well, there's this cat's tail right under his nose here. And, we're all human. And I think that maybe can be a good thing going forward.
Yeah, you found that sometimes when those impromptu moments happen and you've got the CEO of a major client on, and all of a sudden something like that happens, it actually strengthens the humanity of the moment and makes you more approachable and more real.
Mm-hmm. I guess one more thought I had while you were telling that is that I think as a culture, we're understanding when it is appropriate to be on screen though too, because I have, some people are fatigued by it and, having that view into your home all of the time. So I have had some folks that, said, can I just call you right now? I need to take a walk while we're talking, or so, and just have a phone call. You don't need to see me right now. And that becomes something that we have to understand too. When is it appropriate to need to see each other virtually, and when is it not?
Rick and Lauren and Brad, anything that you would add to that?
I agree with Laura that it's been sort of a window into others' lives. So you do learn a little more about someone that you may not have learned. Similar to if you had gone into a CEO's private office and they had memorabilia or photos or trinkets up on their shelves. You could, I can speak for myself. I'm heavily influenced by my surroundings. I visually take in everything, right, as a visual learner. So always looking at those little snapshots and looking at people's backgrounds. So it has been a nice humanizing element. That being said, my personal experience has been too, it's difficult to sometimes keep things focused on the screen, right? Being at home, there's an element going on in another room. There's a child or a dog or a significant other that's also doing something. And so there's so many other elements that kind of come into play on a day-to-day basis at home that maybe don't come into play at the office because everybody is somewhat moving in the same direction through the workday, right? We're all doing work product for the most part, and there's outliers to all those situations. There just seems to be more anomalies at home that you have to contend with, which I think, although on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis, you can deal with them, but multiply that by weeks, by months, by a year plus, it begins to become taxing. And so you begin to get that fatigue of always being on screen, always being cognizant of these other activities that are going on in your home, and what the perception may or may not be. A little off subject, I can also speak to that as a visual person, I struggle a little bit with every single meeting being on a Zoom because I use situational places and incidents or interactions to sort of like categorize what we met about, what we talked about. And everything is just on this black box. And so as I try and go through my memory of things that were discussed, everything has the same visual reference. It's all a black box sitting in my office. So it becomes very strung together. There's no variation in the workday. 2020 seems like one big long black box Zoom call. I know we did a lot. I know we had a lot of good times and bad times, but it seems to be all one element, and it's that lack of variety, I think, is also strenuous and draining.
That's
Yeah, I think
great. Go on, Brad.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it goes back to kind of your first question and comment on getting this started. Is it's really just the blurring between those work-life balance and what's going on there. You know, you're not just working your 9 to 5. You might be working 6 to 10, then you take a little break and you come back in at the end of the day. You know, it's just it's a challenge, and knowing also then when to disconnect from that and how to step away when appropriate, when you're always connected. And now the expectation is you're always home. You always should be connected, and there's no reason you almost don't need to answer an email any time of day. So I think finding that balance and knowing how to also step away from that is really important in your personal life, and also just for your culture as a company. You need your employees to be able to take that break.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that. I heard Laura say 5 a.m. emails. I am a 5 to 6 a.m. That's my power hour, right? That's when I'm getting a lot of emails sent. But I also am very clear to communicate. I actually put it in my signature that my working hours may not be your working hours. Please feel free to respond at a time that's appropriate, because and I talked to my team about it too, right? I'm working these weird hours, but I am taking these breaks, and really being intentional about that, so that the it's not interpreted as, oh my gosh, Lauren's working 24 hours a day. What does that mean? And how, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for Lauren's wellness? But being really clear about, this is when I'm working, this is not when I'm working, and I am taking those breaks and taking care of myself. And you should too.
That's awesome. There are 3 more things that I'd like to hit today, and I'm going to try to hit them in this order if I can, because there are people here that are probably super interested in what's it done to the space, what's it done to the people's need for office space, which Brad can help us understand. And then Lauren, the ergonomics of this shift are incredible. So what I walked away from in the first section was this: make changes in your space, keep the visual interests going to hold the interest of the audience that you're speaking to as well. Number 2 is let it be human. At the end of the day, when you're working from home and we're working through a period of disruption where childcare is an issue or personal and business meld, let it be human. The separation of the 2 spaces, work and home, has diminished to a degree, kind of counterintuitively. And the third is leverage the disruption of the moment as well. Don't think that, like the CNN guy that was trying to shove his small child out of the room. Hey, you know what? Pick them up, put them on the lap, make them part of the dialogue, and make it a human moment, and the connection is better. So let's go to the second part of this session, and that's really around how did your spaces change? And I think everybody's probably read ad nauseum what will go on, but let me talk about it just from the instance of what we did at Hahn within the first couple of weeks that enabled us to kind of work into COVID and the new work environment. And then I'm going to turn it over to the experts and let Laura and Rick maybe talk a little bit about it. And then we'll come back, talk about spaces changing, and then the ergonomics of today versus what it was as well. So maybe to kick this section off, I'll talk about just the conference room. One of the things that we did differently in my workplace that first started is we immediately changed all of our conference rooms. And we started with the ones that were most used. And we, of course, diminished the number of people that could be involved. Number 2, we got rid of all the big tables and we went to these comfortable kind of almost lounge seating settings with a small table in front of you so that you had your own personal workspace within the conference room. But then we took the technology and we said, okay, with Teams and Zoom, we need one large screen as big as possible so that we can see people real time, real face. And the second was for the content that was being presented. That was the immediate change that took place really within weeks at the Hahn Company. As you look at what you initially saw, Laura and Rick, what initial things did you wrestle with to help your clients bridge into this new pandemic era that helped them create business continuity and help them communicate and interact effectively?
I will say, I think we're still wrestling with that question. I think it's a very much evolving situation as we continue to work with our clients and assess their needs, because I think much of the office community is still hashing out, sorting out, evaluating, and really trying to digest what the future of work means for them in particular. I think that's the greatest challenge for us, is that we've leaned into the expression that, you know, no size fits all. And so you do really have to pay attention to the individual work environment or the entity, the business, and what's right for them. There is no application that suits everybody. So I'll let Laura kind of expand upon this, but one of the things that we're challenged with is, how do you create that connection between in office and out of office, and what does that mean, and how do you supplement spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the good news is that, and Rick Anderson, you talked about this at the beginning of the panel, is that we were already heading in this direction. So I think, there was a good momentum to really start to figure out, what do people really need from the office? And then this experiment kind of accelerated everything. And so now we're able to kind of look at where we were headed. So whether it's just giving people a variety of the correct types of office spaces, and now understanding what type of technology needs to go in there, and really taking a look at each space that you're doing, and how does it facilitate what the people that work there need. So really getting in there to understand, what are their functions, what are their behaviors, their culture. And we've kind of been looking at it with our clients in a series of sort of buckets, we call them, when we talk about their productivity. What do they need to get their job done? Their culture itself, and that way that they want to be connected, and then ultimately their well-being. So what will make them feel good and in control when they come back to the office? Safety, that sort of thing. So I think, just like it was before the pandemic, not an open office didn't work for everybody, but now it's, again, understanding how do people work, what types of space is going to bring them back to the office that will be different than just getting, sitting at a desk and getting their work done, because they can do that at home, and we know that now. So
do you feel like there was a bunch of your clients that might have come to you and they expected that you guys, because of your insights, would have a magic wand that you could wave and say, your workplace now needs to look like this, and let's start working on it tomorrow? Did you have a little bit of that going on as well?
I think people are expecting us to have the answers, but I think then that's where we do come back and say, but you need to help us understand the way you need to function and interact. Sure. Because having a big giant screen, for everyone, maybe they don't need to see that many people on a screen, or, maybe, different technologies, what do they need to present and share? So you don't have to kind of come out of the gates with the biggest and best. Maybe it's understanding what they really will use.
Rick,
for sure.
I was just going to say you're absolutely right, and that some people expect sort of an immediate solution. I will say there are some things, though, that we have agreed to that are changing, right? That the work week is going to be different. I think we can all understand that there's going to be greater latitude in the 9 to 5 days a week, and so that is changing. The big question for us whenever we engage with an end user is, how much of a hybrid workforce will they have, and how much do they want to utilize that? Because that ratio really dictates what we can do from a spatial planning standpoint. If they're willing to embrace that hybridization, where they'll have some of the workforce moving in and out of the office, then we can start addressing, the actual workstation footprint. What does it mean to be unassigned? And then what do these meeting spaces, what do these collaboration spaces need to be? And then how do we need to bridge the gap between in office and out of office? Is that a technology solution? Is it not a technology solution? And so we can add, I think what we've gotten is we can ask the questions. I think we're learning, Laura and I and the rest of the team are learning the right questions to ask, but the answers are variable depending on the end user.
For sure, for sure. I know for us, one of the things that was really interesting in our workspace is that there are a couple of things that were obvious. The obvious things for us were, how can we get together in one space when needed to collaborate? Number two was, what changes in our personal space within the office needed to occur? It was really about, how easy is it to keep clean? How easy is it to access it? What are the panel heights if they're in cube heaven? But one of the things that I found that was really interesting for me is the speed and the need for reconfiguration. So in our business, and I'm going to fire the next question to Brad, is we became really strike team oriented. Okay, here's an opportunity for us to go solve at the Han Company. Let's put a team together. And if that team's in the office, where are they going to sit? How are they going to work together? So there became this premium on the certain parts of our furniture assortment that were super reconfigurable. So that became a premium. Then it became about cleanability, because we learned that we need to have new cleaning protocols. Then it became around what new furniture items helped us facilitate reconfigurability, cleanability. Brad, in your workspace, did things change when you were in the office about how your teams interacted that really changed the needs of your facility plan?
Well, once again, we were luckily already set up for mostly to accommodate this, with hoteling being the standard and flex workspace already existing here. So once again, we were ahead of the curve, I think, in a lot of ways in that regard. That being said, our conference rooms definitely had to change. We had to reduce seats. A lot of the things you hit on when we first started talking about this are what we implemented. We haven't necessarily reconfigured a lot of our interior space, other than reducing the amount of people and chairs available to facilitate them. But at this stage, once again, we're typically utilizing a lot of that similar technology, large screens, so that people that are not able to meet in person are still able to attend and feel like they're a part of it. Cameras in the conference rooms to once again still feel that you could be in there even though you're not. But those are the main things that I'm seeing right now in our space, and what a lot of our clients are implementing as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that the question that probably many people who are listening in would like to maybe hear you address for a moment would be, we're now 18 months to 2 years into this, and and I'll speak from my perspective, is we kind of like where it's going. We like the new flexibility of work from home, because we do work from home solutions. We like work from work, and we like work from other spaces. It didn't turn out to be that, wow, we're supplying workplace solutions now. We're supplying solutions for 3 different workplaces. How has that affected the need for commercial real estate? And are you seeing changes, number one, in the consumption, the space requirements, number two, and third, the space configuration of a building, before we even get into the architectural elements, just the building itself? Can you speak to that for a moment?
Definitely seeing a lot of changes there. And it's ever growing and evolving. So not that what I'm saying today is necessarily will stay true, but we're definitely seeing a shift to, less space, less density. Also, when I say that though, we do need a lot of seats in there, but we are using, we only have seats for, maybe 60% of the population that is assigned to that location, with it known that hoteling and remote working is being built into that solution. So even though they might, typically have always built out an office space that maybe even has extra capacity in case they want to increase headcount at those locations, we're now seeing, like I said, it's built in with the solution in being that people will work from home part of the time, at least, if not most of the time. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could dovetail into that, because we've done some workplace work again with Cushman as well. It's really about capacity and utilization. It's maximizing the square footage. Whereas historically there had been sort of a square foot per person model. We're seeing post pandemic, and again, we don't want to be designing for post pandemic. We want to be taking the lessons learned, the opportunities, and designing for a new workplace. What strategies can we use and implement forward that are not necessarily COVID related, but are improvements into our work culture and work strategy? So part of that is optimizing the footprint, optimizing the utilization of the space, ensuring that the conference rooms are being used on a more regular basis for teams to gather and strike teams or whatever it might be to work together. They may be working remote on their heads down stuff, but if they're in the office, they're there to be together, and they should utilize those rooms, those volumes of space to collaborate, and not just sit dormant or empty because we're all sitting at desks and Skyping one another remotely. So it becomes a conversation of how do you optimize and get greater use out of each and every entity within the workplace.
I love it, Rick. One of the things that's really interesting for our business is that, like everybody on this call, we don't have conversations about work from work as a standalone singular conversation now. We engage our clients, and it's really around, hey, as we talk about your workplace, we'd like to talk first of all about work from work, then we'd like to talk about work from home, and then we'd like to talk about the third space, our business around cafes and common areas where people can collaborate in constructive daily, impromptu collisions and make that conversation happen. That requires a space that's different than prior to the pandemic. It used to be you could stand outside somebody's cubicle and have a conversation. Now they want to move to a collaborative space so that they can maintain that social distancing but still collaborate. So we like the conversation around, hey, let's talk about work. And work is different now. It's work from work, work from home, and work from the third space. So I agree completely. Lauren, can you talk to us for a moment, changing direction here? You talked about working from the kitchen table or working from the dining room table, and how that may be great for short periods of time, but what were the changes that you were coaching people through? And what was need number one versus need number two, need number three? And the third part of that question is, has that need further evolved now so that the home workplace, now you're coaching around something way more complex?
Yeah, do we have 4 hours? Can I talk for? I think that, we realized very quickly that where people need to be supported where they are working. And to your point, we're working everywhere. We're working multiple places, and the support cannot stop in those places. So when people talk about a hybrid plan, it sounds very great. And we need to think about, are we providing them the tools to be effective wherever they're working, so that we're not getting acutely injured, getting injured over the long period of time. So that's number one. We need to make sure that wherever people are working, they're physically set up to be safe and healthy. And then number two would be the mental aspect. Are we communicating expectations? Are we communicating the fact that I trust you even though I can't see you? Let's have regular check-ins. How are you doing? Not what are you doing? These sort of mental check-ins. And then I would say, let's start talking about psychological safety. Both Laura and Brad brought up these ideas a little bit about, when I come back to the office, that space needs to clearly communicate to me that I am safe there. And it can't be red caution tape that we're using to create distances, right? It has to be something more elegant, more welcoming, so that I know that the physical distancing is there when it is needed, and I feel safe using that space. So those are some of the things that we've been talking a lot about. One interesting thing that we've been thinking about lately is this idea of the occupancy of a space can really impact the acoustics of that space, and therefore impacts the way that we use that space as well. When we were all in a hustling, bustling office, we could take a phone call from our desk, no problem. And now that one voice in an office that has 50% occupancy feels very obtrusive, feels very invasive to the people around. So that one phone call is now being taken in a phone booth or a room. The way that we're using the space is changing a little bit to accommodate this wellness, accommodate the acoustics, accommodate the way people are working a little bit different. And back to that point of the pandemic is sort of unearthing some things that we were headed towards anyway. We're talking a lot about how we can use this opportunity to design spaces that are more inclusive as well. thinking about inclusivity on multiple spectrums, including neurodiversity, including cultural equality, including, Brad brought up the idea of equality between remote workers and in-person workers, and how do we show up and have equal opportunities. So we're sort of, it feels like a silver lining here that we have this tipping point where we can start thinking about, as we're redesigning these spaces, how can we do better?
Fantastic. And thank you for boiling that down. I think that what I would offer anybody on this call, if you want to reach out to Lauren directly, she's the most accessible person that I work with on a regular basis, and please do that. The final part of this conversation is probably the most fun. For the 62 people still on board, we've only lost like 4. This is the secret sauce. So this section is actually called secret sauce, okay? And this isn't something none of us have prepared for, so I'm going to kick off secret sauce. And here's how it works, okay? If you had 3 to 5 things, and they have to be bullet points, that you would share with people on this call that coming out of the pandemic made us better, made us stronger, made us more collaborative, what would those things be? So I'll start off with, just to maybe get the juice flowing here. For me, it's a couple of things. First of all, secret sauce is this, okay? First of all, how do you structure your day-to-day operating model? And I don't mean making widgets in a factory. I mean the operating model of your business. And what I mean by that is this, okay? So for me, I noticed right away that every meeting became a Teams call. And there were all these random Teams calls happening that had interlaced tentacles that worked within each other, but they weren't organized. So we quickly said, we're going to build for our team an operating model. That included a stand-up meeting every day where everybody called in on Teams, and we said, actually, you got to stand up. And we were going to go through what were the priorities of the day, what were the deadlines, what were the risk factors, who needed more resources, et cetera. That was our operating model. And we built operating models around what is the daily operating model, what was the weekly operating model, and then what did we have to do to manage our business through this new remote environment, and what occurred monthly. How do we measure our success? So we built operating models around everything. Number 2, software became a premium. I'm a Mac guy, got my Mac open right now, but you know what I love is the Microsoft suite of tools that all works together. If I have Office 360, I have the ability to tie all these different tools together, so no matter what device I'm on, I'm able to work effectively across all of them. If I have my phone, I can have a Teams call. I can use Microsoft To Do. I can tie it all together. Now, it's going to be different software for everybody, but I found that interlacing my software tools so I could work digitally any place, anytime, anywhere was important for me. And then the third thing I would share is that coming from that, actioning things real time. I found that with all the calls going back to back to back, my days were extraordinarily long if I was taking notes in my old notebook. But I found that if I tiled my screen and I had Microsoft To Do open, and then I had my Teams call open, and I had notes that I was working on, I could tie it all together and I could share it real time with people on the call if need be. The fourth thing I found was this was the real secret sauce. When I was working in the office and I had a team member that was doing a great job, I could stop by their desk and say, hey, Laura, great job. Really appreciate what you're doing there. And I thought that was really thoughtful. It's really hard to do that when you're working remotely and you have people working in the office. And in order to be, to spread the wealth and accolades to everyone, we created something called recognition boards. Within Microsoft Teams, we created a recognition board where you could actually shout out to people and they would actually receive a copy of the shout out. Then we got better at it. We said, you know what? We not only shout out, we're going to give every manager a number of different things like icons almost, where you could reward people with a $25 Starbucks card, a 50 or 100. And we give a certain number of those out that had to be awarded every quarter. So we found that people were beginning to recognize folks as well. So those were my 4 secret sauce items: software tools, actioning real time, recognition boards, and structured operating models. Why don't we start with Lauren this time? And Lauren, what did you have anything that for you stuck out as secret sauce, something you'd share with all the people on this call?
Yeah, I have 3, and they're a little bit less tangible than yours, Rick, but my number 1 would be communication. Is that yours too, Laura?
Yep,
Just
right on board.
what's going well, what's not going well, what you need, what your requirements are, what people can expect of you. Just being really open and honest about where you at, and over communicating, at the risk, rather than under communicating. So that's number one. Number two, I would say empathy. I think that we would not have survived the last 18 months without a little bit of grace and gratitude and humanization of everyone in this really challenging time. I've heard stress being called the secondary pandemic because, we were all at max stress level before COVID, and now, I mean, it's through the roof, right? So just a little bit of empathy. And then number three, I would say, is resiliency and coming with strategies on how we can, manage what is tangible, what is achievable, setting realistic expectations, and really being thoughtful about how we're doing and how we can sustain. Communication,
Lauren, you're
empathy, and
next.
resilience. What was that?
Laura, you are next.
Oh,
Okay, good. Well, good, because I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things. So the communication, absolutely everything Lauren said. And I guess one little bit I would add to it is just raising your hand when you need help too, because, something that's come up lately is, when you're not in person, you can't just turn around and say, hey, how do you do this thing? I can't get this going right now. Or if you have a question, so as far as training and mentoring people, really, we have to be our own advocates for when we need some of that help, and reaching out that way virtually has been really key. And I was going to kind of talk about empathy as well. I think you did an absolute fantastic job, Lauren. So my other bullet point was really flexibility, which I think falls in line with some of the other stuff you were saying too. So sometimes things are not going to go exactly the way we want if we're not all set on the same schedule in the same office in the same space. So really, understanding that, and so in conjunction with that communication, being able to help each other and pivot and make it work. So I don't know, I kind of stuck by with two, but
that was great. Well, Brad, what about you? And then Rick's gonna give us the closer there.
Yeah, I think my keys that have really, gotten us through are, one thing we've been talking about a lot, but that flexible working times. You don't have to just work, 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever your timeline is. It's the outcomes that are important. As long as you're on there and being responsive, what needs to be done. I think everyone has become a little bit more welcoming to that type of work style, and I think that's been huge for our company, I know, and I think a lot of others. Another one, though, the labor market's been really tight right now, but what this does is actually, it has given our company, accessibility to outside talent that we would have probably not looked at before, because we weren't open to having people work remotely 100% of the time. Whereas now, now that this becomes so much more ingrained in our lifestyle, we're able to hire people in different cities that have the skill set we're looking for, but like I said, maybe aren't located here and we're willing to relocate like they might before. And the third thing, I think it goes back to the empathy thing that Lauren and Laura have both touched on, but it's really making sure you make time for your team in a not just personal manner, or not just business manner, but also in that personal manner. We don't have time for those water cooler conversations anymore. But I still think that's how you really get your culture and build that relationship with your team and your employees, is ensuring that you are finding some time, whether it just be 15 minutes a week or whatever it is, just to connect and really get to know them, still on that personal level, because I think you lose that when everything's done digitally.
Thank you, Brad. Rick, over to you.
Well, Brad's last point was definitely one of mine, was that you need to cultivate those relationships, not just work relationships, but interconnection relationships. Get to know people, or continue to know people on a personal level. Don't just be asking about, work product or work, but still continue those connections, because our work is a part of our culture. I think the other maybe more tangible things, and as we've begun to come back to the office a little bit more, mine relate to more of that flexibility, that hybrid office. So first thing that I learned was redundancy. So embrace the technology, as you said, Rick, but I have additional chargers, right? My home has a charger, my office has a charger, I keep a charger in my bag. I have a couple different headsets. So taking the stress of making sure I get everything packed up depending on where I'm working, I've found it much easier to have sort of a setup at home, a setup at the office, and then my go bag. So if you're able to, it's worthwhile to invest in duplicate to take some of that stress out of it. I've also learned that something that I lost, during the pandemic was my transition period, the period in which I go from working to being dad. And, it was a very abrupt stop when I was working at home, leave the home office, and then all of a sudden it was dad duty, and I didn't have a chance to sort of recalibrate and reset. And so as I've been commuting a little bit back and forth to the office, I've learned to build in some of that transition period, even if I've been working at home. Close down the laptop maybe a few minutes early, take a moment to do something else before I re-engage with the family to sort of reset. I've found that to be less stressful.
Thank you. That's awesome. Appreciate everybody today. Now we're going to close out with what I call rapid fire. Most important COVID widget. What physical item is most important, or items, you get a couple, are most important and have changed as you come through COVID? Like things, for example, I've noticed, tagging on what Rick said, that the number of people that have Mophis on their phone now because they need that extra battery power through the course of the day is incredible. I've noticed people also investing, and Apple has to love the pandemic because of earpods, etc. But what device, what widget has become your best friend in this new workplace? Laura, let's start with you.
Darn it. I was going to call out my real special nerdy looking mouse that I use at home, because I was experiencing, severe kind of wrist issues, and that was a lifesaver because I didn't have the same sort of setup that I was used to at the office. So it looks
Laura,
like something that would control a spaceship, but I love it. So
you took mine. I learned the hard way about proper ergonomics at home, and and ended up with some good carpal tunnel bossing in my hand because of trying to use a bad mouse. So love the right mouse.
Yes.
Brad, what's your widget?
It might be a cop out, but my cell phone, just being able to always be connected. If I'm at home, I'm out walking my dog, I can still get a Teams call, hop on that and not miss a beat. To your point earlier, that Microsoft suite that's on there, I'm always connected, always have access to all those documents. No matter where I'm at, if I'm in the office, it's still, even like I said, if I walk over to get a coffee, I can still be connected to my Teams and my email with whatever's coming in and really not ever miss anything, which can sometimes be a blessing and a curse, but it's definitely been a huge help in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to switch team calls from my cell phone to my computer has been just the greatest. So I can, go get those snacks and not, for the kiddos and not drop a beat. Again, blessing and a curse, but yeah, I would say that. And, my bike, getting that 2-minute break to go around the block and, decompress, get that little quote unquote commute from my desk is a COVID blessing.
Good, thank you. Now, this may have felt a little bit disconnected for those listening in, but it all comes together in this. First of all, a great panel, but what I would say is that what we learned today is that the space between work and home is blurred, and that in order to keep it real, you've got to actually embrace that and let it integrate at times. You also have to find the space to step away for a moment. And then also we've learned that working is entirely different, not just the workplace. That's sometimes the smallest part of it. We're wrestling with the change in culture around how we work in our workspaces, whether they be home or whether they be at work. So Laura, thank you very much. Rick, thank you as well. Lauren, thank you. And Brad, thank you as well. If there are any questions, Jack, maybe you can help us proctor any questions that might come in.